And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. What day is January 26th? 26th day of this new year. 339 days remain to the year's over with. Me start a new one. Well, excuse me. Holidays and observances. There's always a holiday, an observance of some kind going on. It's National Bubble Wrap Day. It's that satisfying pop, I suspect. The protection for fragile stuff and the stress relief tool all rolled into one. It's National Green Juice Day. Sip a refreshing blend of leafy greens and zesty fruits, like getting a vitamin-packed energy boost. National Spouses Day. Show appreciation for your life partner by reminiscing about your favorite memories or planning a getaway or trying some new activity together. And it's Dundee Day. Scenic landscapes, rich history, and a vibrant culture characterize this Scottish city with bridges spanning the Silvery Tay. Community Manager Appreciation Day. National Peanut Brittle Day. And a National Day of Clean Energy, whether it's solar or wind. Toad Holiday of Encouragement. Special kindness at like confetti and watch the world sparkle. It's a kind of encouragement is all it takes to help somebody achieve their dreams. Better Business Communication Day. Dental Drill Appreciation Day. I certainly do not appreciate those. International Customs Day. When importing goods, some countries charge an additional fee to protect their industries, generate revenue, and promote economic policies. Australia Day. Down under, this is the land of kangaroos and beaches and barbecues. Vast, diverse, and adventurous continent waiting to be explored. World Environmental Education Day. Indian Republic Day. India's supreme legal document's been guiding the country since its inception, laying out the fundamental rights and powers of government, kind of like our Constitution. Family Mediation Day. Times of times of strife. A compassionate guide helps loved ones bridge divides and fosters harmony in the heart of discord. Suits and sneakers for Cancer Week. Instead of those shiny black shoes or brown shoes, a lot of folks put on their suit and put on their sneakers. Artes Mundi goes on through March 1st. Catholic Schools Week. National School Choice Week. World Kiwanis Week. And Snow Sculpting Week. We could have done that yesterday here. Who needs a canvas? When winter arrives, it's time to channel your inner artist and create some masterpieces in the snow. Famous people born on this date: Ellen DeGeneres, Paul Newman, Douglas MacArthur, and Diane Lane. Well, at this point, let's see what stories we have in the news, because there's always something going on. Well, the Far Left Network helped put Alex Preedy in harm's way and then made him a martyr. He's one of those who has run afoul of ICE. The skirmish that led to Saturday's fatal shooting of an agitator by Border Patrol agents in Minneapolis and the response that followed were driven by a complex network of far-left organizations with a wide range of causes. That's according to a Fox News investigation. Coordinated web of encrypted chats and street alerts and tracking of ICE abductors is a sophisticated database reviewed by Fox News. Shows that agitators are already mobilized at the scene where 37-year-old Alex Preedy was killed minutes before any shots were actually fired. ICE and Border Patrol agents were there to arrest an illegal immigrant criminal and Pretty and others were there outside a donut shop to meet him as part of a strategic pattern of organized interference with law enforcement operations. Over the next few hours, a national network of socialist and communist and Marxist Leninist cells in the United States leveraged this tragic fatality into a nationwide protest operation. While grief and outrage over Pretty's death is genuine, the network's real-time rapid response using short, sensational video clips and emojis as weapons of propaganda offers a window into the disciplined logistics, messaging, and coordination of far-left warriors fomenting an insurgency-like confrontation with authorities. No matter what happens, the left finds a way to turn it into something they can use. According to Vice President Vance, in a Sunday post on X, this level of engineered chaos is unique to Minneapolis, direct consequence of far-left agitators working with local authorities. The encrypted signal messages obtained by Fox News in real time show that anti-ICE rapid responders were actually tracking and broadcasting and summoning backup around federal agents outside Glam Doll Donuts on Nicollet Avenue. That's where the shooting took place. Local rapid responders made at least 26 entries into a database called MN Ice Plates in the critical hours before and after the killing, documenting the license plate numbers and details of alleged ICE vehicles they claimed to see around Nicollet Avenue. The entry in Road 344 reads, "At the Nicollet murder," chronicling a black Jeep Wagoneer at the location with agents allegedly involved in shooting. Road 338 had a Glam Donuts entry tracking a black Ford Taurus. Yes, they went to quite some detail. If they could harness that for good instead of turning it into a weapon, it'd be a much better life. Well, there's been this saying, go big and go smart. They show a relationship between President Trump, ICE, and the law. The current violence against federal agents trying to expel illegal aliens committed by far-left activists and encouraged by left-wing politicians is just literally unacceptable. In June 2025 in Los Angeles, agents carrying out due process against illegal aliens were assaulted. Mayor Karen Bass blamed federal enforcement for her city's lawless protest and only ordering a curfew when dozens of businesses were looted. And the agents did not loot the businesses, it was the protesters. In September, ICE launched Operation Midway Blitz in Chicago, arresting a lot of criminal illegal aliens in the face of violent protest with no support from Mayor Brandon Johnson or Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. The system just shut itself down. Let's try one more time. Last October, a brawl occurred outside a Portland, Oregon ICE facility between Antifa and conservative activists. In Portland, officers shot two alleged members of Venezuela's deadly Tren de Aragua gang who had attempted to run over him. We all know what happened in Minneapolis between an ICE agent and slain activist Renee Good. Minnesota Governor Tim Walsh responded with a mix of falsehood and hyperbole. He ignored the fact that ICE agents were there to arrest illegal immigrants, usually highly dangerous recidivist criminals pursuant to U.S. law. Well, the president does have some options. Title 10 of the U.S. Code allows him to deploy federal troops in instances of rebellion or danger of a rebellion against U.S. government to protect federal agents and property. The Insurrection Act of 1807 allows him to deploy troops to enforce the laws of the U.S. or to suppress rebellion whenever unlawful obstructions, combinations, or assemblages of rebellion make it impractical to enforce federal law in a state. And immigration enforcement is a federal duty. The Constitution's Supremacy Clause means that federal law overrides state law. No governor or mayor, no matter how left-wing their own policies, can refuse to allow federal agents to do their duty. And private citizens who impede federal agents or local police from doing their jobs are committing a felony. Non-citizens who do so carry the risk of not only getting criminal charges, but also of deportations resulting from a conviction. Well, it keeps escalating. My fear is that we're going to wind up with a out-and-out civil war. But as one of the folks on the internet said, this country's got something that most countries don't. We've got rednecks who don't have a problem popping a cap. Well, this Arctic air has blasted the south after a catastrophic ice storm cuts power to thousands. Utility crews are working around the clock to restore power after a monster winter storm slammed across states across America during the weekend. Thousands of Americans are waking up without power across the south as life-threatening cold air settles into the region. Extreme cold warnings and cold weather advisories are in effect for more than 200 million people, and as temperatures drop into the 10s and 20s, with wind chill dropping many below zero in a lot of states. And it got extremely cold here, even though we're in Texas. Well, Prince William is not showing any diva behaviors. He's forced to give up well-known hobby, according to experts. He's going to have to find a new hobby. The king-in-waiting's recent move to Forest Lodge has forced the royals to give up his electric scooter. His new home is inside the Windsor Great Park, with various forms of motorized transportation are actually banned. For reasons of safety and traffic management, we don't allow motorized transport within the park, according to the park's website. Aside from cyclists, the roads are reserved for residents and estate workers. And royal experts do predict Prince William's going to adhere to the e-scooter ban with ease, highlighting his anti-diva behavior. 43-year-old Prince was known for riding an e-scooter around Windsor Castle. We see a lot of those around here. Well, mass immigration is economic warfare, and very few Americans seem to understand why that is. The State Department's recent decision to freeze visa processing for nationals from more than 75 countries, including Somalia, Iran, and Russia, reflects a growing recognition in Washington. Large-scale migration is no longer viewed solely as a humanitarian matter. It's become inseparable from questions of national security, economic stability, and state capacity. Today's era of hybrid warfare and gray zone conflicts, population movements can function as instruments of state influence, economic survival, and political leverage, even when they're not formally declared or centrally coordinated. These dynamics often operate below the threshold of overt conflict while producing long-term asymmetric effects on receiving countries. And for some origin states struggling with corruption, weak institutions, and limited domestic opportunity, exporting labor has become a de facto economic lifeline. Well, then pursuing different internal reforms, these governments often tolerate or quietly incentivize outward migration. Foreign nationals abroad then become a steady source of income through remittances, predictable, recurring, and largely sanctioned resistant flows that support both households and governments without requiring transparency or structural change. I've been in Albertsons when there have been lines of people wanting to send money, stretch halfway down the store. And it's not just a little bit of money they're sending. They pull out wads of cash big enough to choke a horse to send to their home countries. And it's a steady drain on the local economy. Well, Border Patrol commander sparred with CNN host over deadly Minnesota shooting. CNN host Dana Bash sparred with Border Patrol Commander Gregory Bovino Sunday over another deadly shooting involving federal officials that took place in Minneapolis over the weekend. Minneapolis ICE nurse Alex Preddy was shot by a Border Patrol agent on Sunday. Footage of the incident showed an agent disarm Preddy shortly before he was killed. He entered into an initial scuffle with agents as he tried to assist another protester who had been pushed by law enforcement. Investigation was launched into the shooting, though Bovino previously claimed that Pretty had intended to do maximum damage prior to his death. All the video that we have shows him documenting with his cell phone, which is a lawful thing to do, and the only time he seemed to interact with law enforcement was when they went after him. When he was trying to help an individual, law enforcement pushed down, Bash said. So where do you have the evidence to show he was trying to impede the law enforcement operations? And Bovino responded, yeah, he was there on the scene. He was at the scene actively impeding and assaulting law enforcement. Bash said that's not illegal. He wasn't impeding it. He was filming it, which is a legal thing to do in the U.S. He said, don't freeze frame adjudicate this, but CNN loves to do. He was there for a reason, and that reason was to impede law enforcement. Well, there's also disagreements about whether or not Pretty had a gun. Well, Bill Clinton says Trump administration told us not to believe what we've seen after the latest Minnesota shooting. Well, President Clinton said Sunday after another fatal shooting in Minneapolis involving federal immigration agents that agents are engaging in increasingly aggressive and antagonistic tactics. And the Trump administration told Americans not to believe what they can see for themselves. Alex Pretty, 37, was shot and killed Saturday by Border Patrol agents while recording federal immigration operations in Minneapolis. Pretty was an ICU nurse, appeared to be attempting to attend to a woman agents knocked down when he was sprayed with an irritant, pushed to the ground and beaten. Agent was seen pulling Pretty's gun from his waistband. Other agents fired several shots and killed him. My question is, why was he carrying a gun? That's certainly a antisocial behavior. The shooting follows recent unrest over the ICE-involved killing of Renee Nicole Good in the same city earlier this month. Recent weeks, we watched horrible scenes play out in Minneapolis and other communities that I never thought would take place in America. People, including children, have been seized from their homes, workplaces, and the streets by masked federal agents, according to Clinton. Well, a lot of this problem got its start under his administration. But he seems to downplay that. Well, researchers are puzzled after discovering a mysterious 68,000-year-old cave art. Ancient handprints suggest humans were thinking symbolically thousands of years earlier than science thought. Researchers recently identified Indonesian cave art dating back about 68,000 years. Breakthrough discovery that marks one of the earliest known expressions of human creativity. Rock art was found in a cave on the island of Sulawesi, a tropical island in central Indonesia, southeast of Java and Bali. Pictures of the discovery show reddish-brown handprints, some with elongated or slightly pointed fingernails on the cave wall. Prints are created by blowing pigment over hands pressed on the cave walls. Some fingertips were intentionally modified. This cave art, according to researchers, is the oldest archaeological evidence revealed so far for the presence of our species in the Wallacea region of Indonesia. Findings were published last week in the journal Nature. And the more research that's done, the further back the human race is found. Well, Kristen Stewart plans a dramatic exit from the U.S. over Trump's America First film industry policies. She's saying she's eyeing a move out of the U.S. due to President Trump. The Twilight actress revealed in an interview with The Times she's cultivating her directorial career around being able to create films in Europe because she can't work freely in America. Her directorial debut, The Chronology of Water, was shot in Latvia, as it would have been impossible to do it in the States. Stewart added that Trump's threat of tariff on movies made outside the U.S. is terrifying for the film industry. Reality is breaking completely under Trump, she said, and we're going to take a page out of his book and create the reality we want to live in. The bicoastal actress who spent times in L.A. and New York admitted she's probably not going to live in the States for much longer. Or on the streets either. She said, I can't work freely here. I don't want to give up completely. I'd like to make movies in Europe and shove them down the throat of the American people. That's a great attitude for the folks that gave her the opportunity to do that. Well, there are some Costco perks that can actually pay for your membership. There's some of the lesser known membership benefits. Members can book international trips to get no haggle car pricing with $1,000 or more in savings and receive discounts on moving trucks. From the value packed bulk items to $1.50 hot dogs, which are good, by the way. Costco is renowned for its focus on savings. Warehouse Giant offers far more than just in-store products, though. From travel and automotive programs to remodeling and cleaning services, there are some lesser-known benefits that members apparently are missing out on. So next time you're in there, check them out. They offer a variety of trips, including international destinations, theme parks, and cruises and other excursions. Packages typically include accommodations such as hotels and resorts, as well as transportation, including flights and rental cars. And many offerings come as pre-designed packages. Members also have the flexibility to build their own trips. So it's definitely something to delve into when wandering through Costco. Well, Jasmine Crockett's history of playing the race card, going after conservative and liberal critics, is getting some discussion. She's a Democrat representative from Texas, has a history of accusing her critics of being racist, no matter what side of the political aisle they're on. On Thursday, the Texas Senate candidate fired back at podcasters and comedians and Matt Rogers and Bowen Yang after the two told listeners not to waste their money supporting her campaign. Despite Rogers and Yang later walking back their comments, Crockett accused them of saying the quiet part out loud and going after her because of her race and her gender. Yes, those who love to agitate are very quick to accuse their opponents of being racist, no matter what color the participants are. And toxic wild mushrooms have been linked to 3 deaths as state officials issue urgent warnings. Consumption of death cap mushrooms, often mistaken for safe edible lookalikes, have been linked to a deadly outbreak in California. The mushrooms, officially called Amanita palilodes, contain toxins that can cause amatoxin poisoning, which can lead to severe illness or even death. In the California cases, the poisonings cause severe liver damage in both children and adults, resulting in 3 deaths, 3 liver transplants, and 35 hospitalizations as of January 6th, according to the California Department of Public Health. They warned the outbreak was linked to consumption of wild forage mushrooms and urged Californians not to pick or eat wild mushrooms at this time. Officials stated in a report that capped death mushrooms are still poisonous even after cooking, boiling, freezing, or even drying. So definitely something to keep in mind. Well, the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier strike group is making a move amid a threat from Iran. The Abraham Lincoln has entered CENTCOM waters in the Indian Ocean and amid increasing threats from Iran. A senior U.S. official told Fox News this morning. Reports say Iran's Ayatollah Khamenei has gone underground, suggesting the country may be prepared for military action. Leading U.S. drone expert told Fox on Sunday that Iran's drone swarms would pose a credible and serious threat to the Lincoln and its strike group. Top U.S. officials said the Lincoln wasn't yet ready for any possible future strikes against Iran. Cameron Shields, CEO and co-founder of Dragonfly, told Fox that Iran's created an effective asymmetric threat against highly sophisticated military systems with its fleet of unmanned drones, pairing low-cost warheads with inexpensive delivery platforms. I think we're going to see war break out before long. Well, on that note, we're going to go to our main story for today, because we're still talking about various conspiracy theories, because there's some really weird stories in the conspiracy world. Right now, we're going to start talking about some of the world's forgotten conspiracy theories. There have, of course, been quite a number we've talked about. We're going to start off today talking about Project Bluebeam and the conspiracy that's grown up around that. And anybody who spent much time studying the UFO phenomena can't help but notice that sometimes religious fervor that surrounds the subject. There are quite obvious examples of this at work. Boy, they are out now. This UFO cults that have developed, such as the Raelians and the like. Also, a very subtle religiosity that pervades the subject among UFO true believers, who maybe don't even realize how religiously engrossing they've become. Among those who truly want UFOs and aliens to be real, their belief becomes a form of faith for them. Even more interesting, the recent and near non-stop discussions of disclosure among diehard true believers have become increasingly religious in its field. Disclosure is the notion that there's a coming revelation of all things UFO in which the truth's going to be revealed. UFO fans, without realizing, are going to put so much store in this day that will supposedly change everything, that they've made it into a major spiritual event, similar to the rapture of the second coming that religions like to talk about. Just think of religious fanatics during the Middle Ages telling everybody who'd listen, hey, everything's about to change, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but when Jesus comes back, everything's going to change. Now consider those UFO fanatics doing the same thing today as they ran on and on about as soon as disclosure happens, everything will change, governments will collapse, society will be transformed, and everything will be different. We're going to enter a new age. Well, it's indeed a religious impulse among UFO believers that has them look forward to a major UFO revelation in the near future. If you notice, it's always in the near future, it's never now. Now take this same religious fervor and add in the conspiracy theory the government's getting ready to actively mix the faith of both UFO fanatics and traditional religious fanatics together by way of a little something called Project Bluebeam. Now, this particular conspiracy theory was the brainchild of a Canadian journalist by the name of Serge Monast. Literally wrote the book on the subject. In the 1990s, he published his infamous work, Project Bluebeam, parentheses NASA. In the book, he made wild claims that NASA is getting ready to use hypergraphic technology to imitate both the arrival of UFOs as well as produce traditional religious imagery. This tech was supposedly so advanced it could turn the daytime skies into a movie screen, in which huge holographic images would be beamed for the whole world to see. Aliens and angels interacting together. Now, frankly, that's a bit much, but according to Monast, the whole point of the project is to tailor the images to the beliefs of those viewing them. Folks in the Roman Catholic faith staring up from Rome would literally see Christ emerging from the clouds. Other religions in other parts of the world would see their own religious figures. It would also supposedly be visions of UFOs projecting across the sky so that the UFO true believers wouldn't feel left out. Monast claims the final touch will be when all these projected figures that whom the whole world's been intentionally staring at certainly merge up to form one unifying force, or God, if you will, which the government would then use to control the whole planet. Well, the very idea is weird and wild, but it was Monast's story and he was sticking to it. That is, while he was still breathing. Gave several interviews in which he discussed the topic, and just as his book on the subject was beginning to gain traction, he abruptly, mysteriously died. His death in 1996 was sudden and allegedly due to a heart attack. Now, there are conspiracy theorists who beg to differ, insisting he was likely killed by government enforcers for spilling the beans on their secret plans. It was his sudden death that really put the Bluebeam conspiracy over the top, since it played right into the hands of fringe conspiracy theorists who felt that Monast truly did have revelatory information that some force was trying to suppress by having him killed. Leading up to the year 2000, conspiracy theorists were constantly chattering about Bluebeam, suggesting it could happen any time. Well, as you might guess, that talk eventually died down, but it never went away completely. As evidenced in the fall of 2024 when a sudden surge of unidentified aerial phenomena or UFO drones made an appearance over New Jersey. These objects defied any explanations. They brazenly flitted about for several weeks on a nightly basis. It was as New Jersey descended into a state of near hysteria that some people began to whisper that this was just the first step in the staging of Project Bluebeam. Well, it seems this particular conspiracy theory isn't fading away anytime soon. Well, for those who really are into religion, there's long been a story that there's a relationship between the country of Ethiopia and the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the Ark of the Covenant, of course, is a mysterious object, basically described as a gold-plated box with an ornate lid. And this gold-plated box had large round rings on its corners so that long wooden poles could be slid through them. And these poles were held by people who were assigned to carry the ark. Supposedly, if you touched the ark with your bare hands, you'd die. And there's a number of stories in the Bible about that happening to people. Instead, they were supposed to handle the ark through these wooden poles. And this was supposedly so they wouldn't be contaminated. They wouldn't contaminate the holy object. But there are conspiracy theorists who believe that it was really a means to prevent contamination from an object which produced harmful radiation. Now, ancient people have had no conception of things such as radiation, so it likely would have been a whole lot easier to simply explain, hey, this object's holy and shouldn't be contaminated with your unholy hands, so don't touch it. Because if you do, you're going to be smitten with the wrath of God. Well, a statement like that would have been more readily understood by ancient people than somebody trying to explain this ark contains a mini nuclear reactor. You don't have any clue what that is, but it emits invisible wavelengths of something called radiation that's going to kill you. Well, the Bible records that there were, in fact, times when those handling the ark did indeed accidentally touch it, and the result was not a good thing. They died. Back then, folks attributed these deaths to the power of God. But as mentioned, conspiracy theories have their own ideas about what caused the deaths. Some suggest maybe the ark was some sort of powerful device, as mentioned, maybe even a nuclear reactor of some sort. And if it was indeed a nuclear device, having somebody touch it with their bare hands would certainly be deadly, since the radiation alone would be enough to kill them. Of course, unless the gold-plated box had an extra layer of shielding not specifically mentioned in the Bible. Make one wonder why anybody standing near such a device at all would be injured, not just touching it. But such practical details are of no concern for conspiracy theorists, of course. This powerful object, said to decimate Middle Eastern armies who opposed the Israelites, later disappeared from history. Seeming that its disappearance coincides with the Babylonian invasion, which took place in 587 or 586 BC. When Jerusalem was sacked by her enemies. Seemed logical enough that the ark would have been among the items carried off by the invaders. Question is, how did they carry it, though? But for some odd reason, the ark was never mentioned as one of the goodies stolen during the conquest of Jerusalem. Just an incredible and infamous item would certainly have been mentioned if it was acquired. But instead, there's just silence. It's for this reason that some began to wonder if it was quietly removed and transferred someplace else, just prior to the sacking of Jerusalem. This is just a guess, but nobody seemed to know where it might have been taken. The idea that it was hidden away in Ethiopia in the meantime actually comes from the Ethiopians themselves. This account of the ark's whereabouts first appeared in a medieval text called the Kebra Nagast. The book relays the story of how the Ethiopian queen of Sheba allegedly visited King Solomon, and they entered into an illicit affair, and an affair that produced a son whom she named Menelik. Supposedly from Menelik, that the royal line of Ethiopians who would rule the Ethiopian Empire, which lasted for several centuries, duly emerged. A bit ironic that an illegitimate child will be held in such esteem. And this irony was not lost on Ethiopian revolutionaries who overthrew the monarchy in the 1970s. They did frequently mock and indeed assassinated Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie in 1975. They referred to him as being descended from the illegitimate tryst between the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. It is believed that Solomon's illegitimate son Menelik and his mother connived a way to get the ark away from Solomon. Many Ethiopians seem to believe this conspiracy theory to be true and insist that the ark is hidden somewhere in the north of the country. More specifically, it's been suggested that the ark is hidden inside the Church of Our Lady of Zion in Aksum in Ethiopia, guarded by Ethiopian Orthodox priests at all times. In fact, to this very day in 2025, there's a designated priest in place at this monastery charged with watching over the hidden ark until his death. And prior to his demise, he carefully chooses his own successor to do the same thing. These rumors about the ark eventually reached Western ears, and Scottish explorer James Bruce made his way to Ethiopia in the year 1768. to find out for himself, but despite his efforts, it doesn't seem Mr. Bruce was ever given access. Go forward a couple of centuries later, however, in 1941, a researcher named Edward Uhlendorf, who was stationed with the British Army in Ethiopia during World War II, claimed to have seen the Ark. Ethiopia had been temporarily occupied by fascist Italy, but the British, along with a group of Ethiopian freedom fighters led by the deposed Ethiopian monarch, Haile Selassie, were able to push the Italians out. Uhlendorf himself became friendly with Haile Selassie, and this friendship apparently led to granting him access to what no one else had ever gotten access to, and that was the Ark of the Covenant. Mr. Uhlendorf claimed he was taken to see the Ark, but he didn't seem too impressed. He said it was just an old wooden box. But maybe looks are deceiving. Maybe that wooden box has untold powers that most of us could hardly imagine. Or at least, so the conspiracy theorists would like us to believe. Well, one of my books that came out recently was about the assassination of Malcolm X. And you can find that book if you go to Amazon Kindle, look up Ken Hudnall, and you'll see all the books that my wife and myself have written. As of yesterday, I think we have written 110. Now, the Nation of Islam is some really shadowy conspiratorial origins, since it was started by a mysterious figure whose identity remains largely a mystery. Sometimes he's called Wallace D. Ford or Wallace Fard. Many, however, contend that both those names are aliases. Nobody really knows the true history of who this person might be. And this mystery man, this founder of the Nation of Islam, seemingly disappeared into thin air before passing the baton to leadership in 1933 to the much more well-known Nation of Islam leader, Elijah Muhammad. And it was then that Elijah Muhammad would bring the group to national prominence. Strangely, Mr. Ford first emerged on the scene working as a door-to-door salesman. During his rounds, he frequently visited with the neighborhood in Detroit, Michigan, where Elijah lived. Rather than just selling his wares, he would also begin selling a whole philosophy to his customers. And a strange, radical philosophy which borrowed from the religion of Islam. And these borrowings, however, were largely superficial, since the actual teachings of Ford really had nothing at all to do with Islam. He taught an Afrocentric version of history in which he claimed that those of African descent were the first humans on the planet. In ancient times, ruled the earth with advanced technology and science. It was a strange conspiratorial story of a lost civilization, and Ford claimed that only by embracing his teachings could his audience, who were primarily African Americans, reclaim their place as the most advanced civilization on the planet. Might come as a surprise to some, but the Nation of Islam is also an early UFO cult, because Ford unabashedly claimed that he had been in contact with what he referred to as men from Mars. The people he spoke to were mostly poor, desperate souls seeking a way out of their very difficult life circumstances. Despite some of the more outlandish notions Ford peddled, he seemed to offer hope for a better future, and many eagerly listened to what he had to say, including Elijah Muhammad. Elijah was enthralled by Ford and soon became his right-hand man. It was Ford, in fact, who convinced Elijah to change his name from Poole to that of Muhammad. Following that cult's tradition of adopting Islamic names, which continues with the Nation of Islam to this very day. Now, Elijah Muhammad was an eager early adherent and began to become a big promoter of the Nation of Islam back schools. Michigan authorities were suspicious, though, and began to question the group. This pressure led to Elijah and Ford moving to Chicago in 1934. Ford wasn't long in Chicago because by February he had seemingly vanished. Elijah always insisted Ford wasn't long for this world. Not that he died or anything like that, but rather he left the planet entirely. This very day, it's a core tenet of Nation of Islam's belief that Ford left planet Earth on a UFO, or as the Nation of Islam describes it, the mother wheel. Interestingly, in what seems to be a direct mimicry of Christian scripture, which states that Christ descended into the clouds and will return in like manner, Nation of Islam teachers of a similar second coming and be just as Ford left on the UFO, he's going to come back on the UFO. In any case, it was after Ford departed that Elijah assumed for leadership of the group. Ended up moving to D.C., where he continued to propagate the faith over the next few years. His ministry was interrupted in 1942, though, when he and several other Nation of Islam members were arrested for alleged draft dodging. And it is true there was a war on, and the U.S. indeed instituted a draft, but Elijah, for one, was too old at this point to even be considered to be drafted. Draft age was typically 18 to 35, and he was 45. U.S. intelligence agencies such as the CIA and the FBI had long been looking into the Nation of Islam. They just didn't like what they saw. In particular, they were alarmed at anti-American and pro-Japanese propaganda that some members of the group had been preaching. Japan had just bombed Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and the Nation of Islam seemed to be cheering them on. This, of course, didn't sit well with the authorities. Disturbed by the radical nature of the group, they were likely trying to find any reason they could to arrest the leadership. Elijah ended up being detained for the rest of the war, and it wasn't released until 1945. It was this time behind bars that led Elijah to turn his attention to the prison system, began actively converting incarcerated individuals to the cause. One of those individuals was a guy by the name of Malcolm Little. It was, of course, Malcolm Little who would change his name to Malcolm X and became the right-hand man of Elijah Muhammad. Malcolm X began to see things differently by the early 60s, though, and became disenchanted with the teachings of Elijah Muhammad. Real turning point came when Malcolm X made a pilgrimage to Mecca in Saudi Arabia. There he counted Muslims from all over the world who adhered to the original traditional faith of Islam, which Malcolm X soon realized, with the exception of the barest of superficial features, had nothing at all to do with Elijah's Nation of Islam. One of the things that struck him most was that he saw people of all races and ethnicities joining together as brothers under the banner of Islam. This is, of course, quite contrary to the Afrocentric teachings of the Nation of Islam. Touched by this unity, Malcolm X decided to renounce the Nation of Islam and embrace more traditional Islamic faith. This, of course, set him in direct odds with his old benefactor, Elijah Muhammad. Malcolm X was now considered a heretic and an enemy of the Nation of Islam. And it was on February 21st, 1965, during a speaking engagement at the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem, New York, that Malcolm X met his end. As was his fashion, he strode up to the podium and spoke boldly and without fear. The security detail was minimal, as Malcolm had the attitude if somebody really wanted to kill him, there was likely wasn't much he could do about it. Unfortunately, he'd be proved correct in his estimation of events. He'd barely said a few words before a terrible commotion erupted. Somebody in the audience was shouting at somebody else to get their hands off him. Malcolm was heard trying to calm things down when somebody in the back room set off a smoke bomb. Made for quite a distraction, don't you know? Nobody really knew what to make of it as others in the crowd tried to deal with the explosion. It was a distraction that might have served its purpose, though, because while all eyes were on the smoke at the back of the room, a guy suddenly dropped up from the front of the auditorium, pulled out a sawed-off shotgun, and began shooting right up at the stage. Malcolm X took a bullet to the chest. If that wasn't bad enough, suddenly a couple of other guys ran up onto the stage, took out handguns, and fired at Malcolm at point-blank range. So Malcolm X was, in fact, hit with multiple bullets, and in this chaotic overkill, his assailants made sure he didn't stand a chance. The crowd was in a frenzied panic as Malcolm X's lifeblood poured out of him. So the shooters took off, but one of them, Talmadge Hayer, was shot in the leg by one of Malcolm's men. The injured man struggled to get away and was chased outside. An angry crowd then surrounded him and began to beat him. And there's a good chance that mob justice might have taken place right there on the spot if the police hadn't shown up and broken up the agitated crowd. The man was detained, and Malcolm was taken to the hospital, even though he was already likely dead, then officially pronounced as dead upon his arrival at the hospital. In the aftermath, police investigated the crime scene and found the assassins had left behind weapons. Found a shot-off shotgun, a pistol, and a 12-gauge shotgun, as well as several rounds of ammunition. Next day, Malcolm X's former teacher, Elijah Muhammad, didn't mince his words. Rather than showing any sympathy or concern, he bluntly stated that Malcolm X got what he deserved for questioning Islam. Ironically, although Malcolm was actually pulling away from a less militant stance to a more universal and acceptable form of traditional Islam, Elijah seemed to suggest that it was Malcolm's own violent nature that attracted such violence to him. Even worse, in his remarks, Elijah almost seemed to implicate himself in the killing. Elijah was heard to say Malcolm died according to his preaching. He seemed to have taken weapons as his God, therefore we couldn't tolerate a man like that. He preached war, we preached peace. Elijah stated the Nation of Islam could not tolerate a guy like Malcolm X. So did that mean that Elijah was signed off on his killing. A lot of folks back then, as well as today, who feel that was indeed the case. If you want more information on this assassination, you need to go to the Assassination files and get the Malcolm X story. If Elijah was the mastermind of the killing, it'd take a lot of peels of the onion to get back to him as the source, since he had many underlings who were willing to do his dirty work for him. And in the immediate days after the assassination, a lot of his cronies will be arrested. Just a couple weeks after the killing, for example, assassination, the participants, Norman Butler and Thomas Johnson, were arrested. They were also members of the Nation of Islam. But could any clear link back to Elijah Muhammad be found? That was the main question. If there were, it seems that investigators might not have tried really hard to find them. There have long been accusations that the NYPD who handled the case, as well as intelligence agencies who might have been involved, may not have given their best efforts, or even worse, may have actively worked to shield Elijah. It's long been a suspicion, of course, that although Elijah Muhammad was Malcolm X's killer, it was clearly a case of one religious leader wanting to kill his rival. And the police and intelligence community were quite okay with that. They may have felt that Malcolm X, who'd a groundswell of support, especially from the younger generation, may have posed a greater threat to the status quo than Elijah Muhammad and his wacky beliefs ever did. Could be they decided to let sleeping dogs lie, decided not to pursue obvious links back to Elijah Muhammad. Once they arrested the gunman, they didn't look any further, and those diehard zealots of the Nation of Islam apparently refused to implicate their leader. Nation of Islam moved on. In 1972, Elijah made Louis Farrakhan the spokesman of the group. After Elijah Muhammad's death, a few years later, in 1975, another power struggle would erupt when Elijah's son, Rawith Deen Muhammad, like Malcolm X, decided to take the group into a more traditional version of Islam. And as Farrakhan, who would prove to be the diehard supporter of Ford and Elijah's more Afrocentric and UFO-styled teachings. To this day, Farrakhan is proclaiming the virtues of the mother wheel and the second coming of Wallace D. Ford. Nation of Islam has since shrunk to a very small group, but its radical and thought-provoking ideology still piques plenty of interest. In 1995, for example, Farrakhan organized the so-called Million Man March in D.C., which generated quite a bit of media attention. Then my cousin, President Bill Clinton, seemed to have had mixed feelings about the event. On one hand, he commended Farrakhan for bringing people together for a cause. On the other hand, he condemned some of Farrakhan's rhetoric, which he considered to be divisive. Part of this divisiveness is in regard to some of Farrakhan's unabashedly anti-Semitic sentiments. Openly made such remarks on many occasions. Besides her divisive nature, many of Farrakhan's remarks also quite out of this world. He eventually claimed that he himself was an alien abductee and been personally taken on board the Mother Wheel spaceship where he was reintroduced to Elijah Muhammad. Well, despite its dwindling numbers, Farrakhan still holds a steady grip on the Nation of Islam. The legacy of Malcolm X, meanwhile, has been decidedly stunted. He is viewed as a martyr by some, but both Elijah as well as Farrakhan's sentiments have seemingly snuffed out any chance of a real martyrdom among the Nation of Islam faithful. The conspiratorial nature of Malcolm's killings, meanwhile, remains quite clear, since it was a group effort involving multiple people with varying tactics. From the smoke bomb diversion to the multiple gunmen, it's clear this assassination was well planned. The question is, planned by who? To this day, nobody really knows. The conspiracy of silence as to who really ordered this hit remains as firmly in place as ever. Well, you've long heard about Nero supposedly fiddling while Rome burned. Now, while we all likely heard this expression at some point in our lives, the meaning and origin of this sentiment might often be lost on a lot of us in the modern world. First of all, you need to know who Nero was. He was a Roman emperor in the 1st century, presided over the Roman Empire during a crucial period of his existence from 54 to 68 AD. Some of the reasons for this period was so crucial is the fact that it was under his reign that Christianity first began to rapidly spread throughout the Roman Empire. Jesus Christ is believed to have ended his earthly ministry. Whether you believe he was physically resurrected or ascended to heaven is up to you, but supposedly he ended his earthly ministry around 33 AD. After his departure, his disciples began to vigorously promote the Christian faith, starting in the Middle East and then in the surrounding regions. By the time of Nero, Christianity had a strong following in the city of Rome itself. And of course, Nero didn't appreciate this, and like many of the Roman elite of this period, he viewed Christians as a threat to the status quo. Many of their beliefs seemed to be antithetical to Roman rule at the time. So an active effort to suppress Christianity became standard procedure. Things then came to a head when Rome was suddenly engulfed in a terrible fire, destroying many lives and a lot of property. Today, we maybe don't realize the scope of the calamity, but it was a devastating and shocking event. Some might even say it would seem downright apocalyptic. And there lies a clue as to what might have happened in the aftermath. For the Christians were constantly preaching this old world would pass away in an apocalyptic fire prior to the return of Christ. So it's quite easy to blame the fires that engulfed Rome on the zealot Christian sects who preached that Rome itself would indeed one day be burned in cinders. Not hard to connect the dots there at all. So was it Nero scapegoated the Christians and not only claimed that a few radicals were to blame for setting the fire, but that all the Christians collectively were to blame for and had to be punished? This kick-started the most terrible persecution of Christians, similar to what we see going on in Africa today. The Romans of this era had perfected torturous executions. It was the Romans, after all, who devised the process of crucifixion that had been used to kill Jesus. Christians believe he was physically resurrected and later ascended to heaven, but regardless of belief on whether or not resurrection occurred, still a terrible death to undergo. Nero didn't let his Roman forebears down either, because he proved that he too could perfect torturous death to a fine art. Soon he was putting Christians upon a full display, hanging them from the rafters and setting them on fire. At the time, it seemed that most of the Romans were in agreement with Nero that the Christians were a radical sect that were responsible for the burning of Rome, but this belief didn't last, though. Oh, no. Soon the mood shifted, and rather than becoming satisfied with scapegoating the Christians, they began to blame Nero himself. Soon there were stories about how Nero had secretly ordered the burning of his own city in order to make room for new lavish construction projects. New rumors were afoot that Nero was not only in approval of the death and destruction that the great fire brought, but he was actually happy about it. So happy, in fact, he was witnessed laughing and playing his fiddle as the fires raged. This was indeed what the expression Nero fiddled while Rome burned came from. But the question becomes, was it true? Did Nero embark on a major conspiratorial plan to destroy huge sections of Rome just so he could rebuild the city in his own image? Well, it could be true. Roman emperors were known to do some power-mad things, and Nero was no exception. But still, burning down huge sections of one's own city is a bit of a stretch, even for Nero. In any case, Nero actually had a good alibi, which in respect seems to absolve him from guilt. He wasn't even in Rome at the time. He was at his personal villa in Antium, about 35 miles away. And since folks didn't have cell phones back then that we know of, Nero couldn't have texted fellow conspirators in Rome and told them to set the city on fire. So Nero was responsible. It remains a mystery how he could have ordered somebody to start the fire when he wasn't even in the city. Many historians now believe that as much as Nero blamed the Christians in later years after the Roman Empire actually became Christian and transformed them to the Roman Catholic Empire, early Christian writers flipped the script and gave the old emperor a taste of his own medicine and turned him into a scapegoat. So the question becomes, what did happen with the fire? Were Christian terrorists to blame, like Nero suggested? Was Nero to blame? Or was it something else entirely? In all reality, it could have been just a terrible accident. Accidental fires were known to erupt in the crowded city of Rome, and since there was no such thing as a manned fire department, some other rapid response team to put out the fires didn't take much for an unattended fire to burn out of control. Even so, Nero fell out of favor among the suspicious Roman public. His inner circle turned on him, and he ended up committing suicide. Interestingly, the Christian book of Revelation is believed to have been written a couple of decades later. It speaks of a beast of a ruler, which may have been a reference to Nero. It said because the book of Revelation declares the number of the beast is 666, and a numerical translation renders 666 is Nero. The book of Revelation states the beast will be killed from a fatal wound, only to be resurrected, and a counterfeit version of the Christ's own resurrection. Well, Nero killed himself by slitting his own throat. So was the book of Revelation predicting this man who scapegoated the Christians and led such a vigorous persecution would one day return from the grave? Well, even if it wasn't, the so-called Nero Bedivius legend is already making the rounds. The legend spoke of Nero having either faked his own death or that he'd later be supernaturally resurrected. To this very day, nobody really knows who or what was responsible for the Great Fire of Rome, and whether Nero may have played a stringed instrument while it all burned. Well, there's been a lot of rumors about Nero and the aftermath of the fire. The question is how many of them are true. Well, for our last conspiracy for today, how about the question of who is the real Anastasia? Grand Duchess Anastasia Nikolavina, born on the 18th of June, 1901. Child of Nicholas II, the last Tsar of the ailing Russian Empire, and his wife, the hated Alexandra. Tsarina Alexandra was hated by a large majority of the Russian people for a couple of reasons. For one thing, they had a xenophobic hatred of all things German, which wouldn't help when Germany and Russia went to war in 1914 during World War I. Alexandra just happened to be of German heritage, a fact that the Russians would never let her forget, since they routinely demonstrated her contempt by calling her that German lady. Another source of their hatred was her closeness with a strange Russian monk by the name of Rasputin. The monkish Rasputin would come to prominence due to his ability to seemingly heal Anastasia's brother Alexei of symptoms brought on from the hemophilic disorder he suffered from. And nobody really knows how he's able to calm this troubled child, although theories range from his use of hypnotism to outright supernatural powers the strange monk might have had. In any case, the Russian people who were suffering under great economic duress and wartime trauma didn't appreciate the Russian royal family consulting with a monk who apparently had a penchant for drinking, orgies, and other less reputable behavior. Soon the royal family was overthrown outright. Communists took over, and Russia became the Soviet Union. In between all that, the Russian royal family had been in prison, and all of them allegedly executed. And here lies the conspiracy. One of the royals was believed to have somehow escaped his grisly fate. It was rumored that the beautiful young Anastasia was allowed to escape and lived on in hiding. And this rumor continued to spread until in 1920, a woman who called herself Anna Anderson claimed to actually be Anastasia, actually living in Berlin at the time. The story apparently came to life after she jumped off a bridge in what was supposedly a suicide attempt. She was rescued, yet when she was revived, she claimed she was suffering from amnesia. She was taken to a psychiatric facility where somebody there actually began speaking in length of how she resembled the Russian royals. At this point, she latched on to this sentiment and either admitted or remembered she was indeed Anastasia. Claimed she survived the massacre that killed the rest of her family when a soldier felt sorry for him and helped smuggle her out of the execution chamber by hiding her in a blanket. On that note, we come to the end of today's show. We're going to finish talking about whether or not this is really Anastasia in tomorrow's show. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.